Hey guys, good afternoon and welcome to Coffee with My Father. My name is Jeff and this is our weekly family Bible study. This week, we're starting to talk about the Passion story, and we're going to cover what I believe to be about half of it today. Next week, we'll cover the second half, and then after Resurrection Day, we will talk about the resurrection. And this is a very deep, meaningful story. We're going to look at Luke's version. Last year when we did this, we looked at Matthew's version, and they differ some, but the gist of the story is there. They both took different highlights of the events and made it their own. And there is a long discourse here about the end times, and we'll go through some of that and see how that's fitting into today's news, at least as far as I'm being led to understand it. So this story starts in Luke chapter 19. And it starts where Jesus says to his disciples, go ahead, you're going to find a donkey tied up outside. Go get it, and if the owner asks what you're doing, say the master has need of it. And once they bring the donkey back to Jesus, they put their cloaks on it, like a saddle blanket, and he starts traveling into the city of Jerusalem, where throngs of people, and I heard something this week from historians said there was probably about 100,000 lining the streets into Jerusalem to watch him coming in, watch the king come in. Many of the Jews believe that it was a warrior king, a Davidic type figure that was going to relieve them of the pressure of their occupiers. Odd word to use, but Romans were occupying at that point. And as the people were cheering and shouting, they were saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." In Matthew, it says they were singing Hosanna, which basically comes out to be the same meaning. And the Pharisees said, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." And this is an awesome statement. Jesus says, "I tell you, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." And if you've ever seen a picture of Israel or Jerusalem specifically, it's all stone. It is stone and hard packed sand. And to have that amount of stones crying out would have been an awesome noise. On a lighter note, it possibly could have been the first rock concert. Then he goes on to tell them, even if you had only known the day, on this day what would bring you peace, but now is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. Here he was talking about what was going to happen in 70 AD when the Romans burned down and destroyed the temple and Temple Mount, to the level of what we can see it now. But as I read that this time through, could be talking about what's happening today. When your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. And that's essentially what we're seeing in the news today. We've got Hamas in the south Iran and Iraq, in the southeast and east. In Jordan, you still have militant groups that are anti-Israel. In Syria, you've got the Syrian army who's lined up against Israel. You have factions of different Muslim groups that are anti-Jewish and anti-Israel. You now have Russia in there. Move over to Lebanon. You've got Hezbollah and Lebanon and Iran and Syria all packed in there. Just above that, you've got Turkey. So they're pretty much hemmed in. And it is getting, Israel is the time clock, and the Temple Mount is a second hand on that time clock, and it is coming to a head very quickly. Then, this being the Passover week, back in Exodus, we know that the Passover lamb was brought to the house that was going to serve it and sacrifice it and put the blood on the posts and lintels. And it was tied up outside the house until the day that they were told to. So it was presented. We just saw Jesus presented as he came into the city. And then Jesus goes in and begins to clear the temple of the outer courts of the temple of people that are buying and selling money changers, changing Greek money for Hebrew money or Roman money for Hebrew money, and also selling animals of sacrifice for people that didn't have enough wealth to own an animal to bring to the Passover. And as he drives them out where they were selling that stuff, he says, "It is written to them, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." And as I was reading that, I really noticed something interesting. The second thing with the Passover week is the unleavened bread, where you clear your home of all the leaven or yeast in the home. Leaven refers to sin. Yeast refers to sin. So you're clearing your home of sin. And here we see the son clearing his father's house of the sins that were brought to it. And I found that an extremely interesting connection, especially when you look at that first Passover night where they cleaned the yeast out. They didn't have a jar of yeast in the fridge or in the freezer. They didn't have a little nice packet of yeast. They just had yeast. And they made bread was extremely important to the diet. And there had to be yeast everywhere in that house, just from blowing around in the sand and the wind. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, but saying that the kids probably helped clean the yeast out of the house, because it could have been anywhere. And as we were talking about this, I use the example where your grandkids come over, especially, sometimes your kids, and they say, "Oh, we need some money." And you'll say, "Oh, go look in the couches and under everything and see if you find some coins or whatever you find, you can have it." This is when they're little. But so they're cleaning that out of your house for you. And here Jesus comes and cleans the house for his father. I thought that was a real pertinent thing to talk about family and the importance of family. You got to remember, in the Passover, you were to bring your family together under one roof and cover that family with the blood so that the death angel passed over. And here we see Jesus cleaning his Father's house. And then he was teaching in the temple. All through the week we see him temple teaching, proclaiming the good news. The chief priests and the teachers of the law together tried to find a way to discredit him, and they asked him all kinds of trick questions. They asked him by what authority he was saying these things and doing these teachings, and who gave him this authority. And his reply was, I will ask you a question. Tell me, John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? And the teachers of the law and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Sanhedrin all got together and talked about it and reasoned. If we say it's from heaven, he will ask us, why didn't you believe it? If we say it's of human origin, all the people that were just out there praising will stone them because they are persuaded that John was a prophet. And so Jesus tells them, neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things. And there's verses throughout the scriptures that say, if you had known the time, and if they had really known the scriptures and what they claim to know, and not just the traditions, not just the works that would get them to the next atonement day and the next sacrifice, they would have known. If they would have known the scriptures, they would have known that that was the day. And this is who he was. But they had bypassed that knowledge and made it about themselves and made it about, this is the way we see things. This isn't quite the way we see it. So this is wrong. This is blasphemy. And Brother Tyler over at Generation 2434 posted something today about that we can't be like the Pharisees and have our own opinion of what is coming, or how close we are to what is coming, or when it's coming. But we need to look at the scriptures and the Word of God and get our answers from that, so that we don't miss the day, that we don't miss the hour. We have to be looking for it, but not making a prediction, and not trying to bend it to make ourselves feel better. Then he goes on and he teaches some parables. There's a parable the story about paying the taxes. And Jesus says, they ask him, by what authority do we pay the taxes to the governor? Or do we pay it to God? Jesus asks for a coin and looks at it, and it's got Caesar's inscription. And Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar and give to God what is God's. And they still looked after him and tried to trip him up. On and on we go with the tripping up. They ask him a question about David. Then Jesus gives a warning. Beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and have the most important seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses for a show and make lengthy prayers, but these men will be punished severely. This is talking about the teachers of the law, but also it can apply into, those teachers in the ancient Jewish society were the Jewish legal system. And here we see our legal system walking around dressed fancy. They love to be greeted and shake hands. They like the most important seats at the meals and their places of honor. They have made it almost impossible to buy groceries or gas, and they are showing their true colors like the Pharisees did. The Pharisees were the lawmakers of that time. They upheld the law, enforced the laws, the 613 laws, and we see that today as well. And then the beautiful story of the widow who saw the rich people putting in their abundance into the treasury. And then a poor widow came and gave 2 very small copper coins. And Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All the other peoples gave out of their wealth, and her out of her poverty and all that she had to live on." She gave in faith. She put it out there and said, okay, I'm going to make my offering. And it's the last of what I have, but God will provide. And that's why that story is there. Provision, God's provision. And we've been experiencing that here in this household. My wife is out on disability for severe rheumatoid arthritis. I just had bilateral surgeries on my Achilles tendons and had them replaced. And I'm making 60% of what I brought in before, but God has really provided for us. And He's shown us that a couple times this spring. If right here's a window, and on multiple times, quail have flown over out of the field into essentially our backyard. And quail were what God provided the Israelites in the desert for food, along with the manna and bread. And Aaron bakes bread, and we throw bread that's stale out for the local birds. And the quail and the bread in the yard really hit me the other day, that God is really providing for this family in these times. And I can't thank Him enough. I don't know. I can't imagine what we did to get that. But it's been awesome to see. Then Jesus goes on to talk about the destruction of the temple. And after that is when He starts into talking about things to come in the end times. And number one here, as in Matthew, and it is the number one reason all around, it says, watch out that you are not deceived. The deception is going to be thick. It talks about it back in Paul's writings, that the deception is going to be thick. And we see that all over the place. I was watching clips of a conversation where a mother was being berated by a news correspondent, not even a correspondent, a commentator. And this commentator was berating the mother for not wanting a book about a child that had been sexually abused and raped be taught to her child in school. And the commentator was berating this woman as to, how do you have a right to deny other children that identify with that story the right to read it? And the mother said, if they identify with it, it's because they've already been abused and they need greater help. And that sent the commentator into a frenzy. So there's a deception out there, and that's just one level of it, where that whole idea, this is what's good is bad, what's bad is good, what's right is wrong, what's wrong is right. All of that umbrella, and we're seeing it. Then it talks about wars and rumors of wars. Where nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. We see that. There will be earthquakes and famines and pestilences in various places, fearful events and great signs in the heaven. Where do we want to go with this? Nation against nation actually more properly translates into culture against culture. And that's all we see on the news is culture wars. They're telling us we're in a culture war. Not that I see that when I go out in the streets. When I go downtown, go to the store, go to the mall. Not that I'm doing that a lot right now. Excuse me. But we don't see that. In most places, we don't see the culture war unless we turn on the news. But we're told there's one. Deception. There'll be earthquakes, great earthquakes. Some apps now and some reporting systems are not reporting anything less than a 4 or a 5 because there's so many magnitude 5 or greater earthquakes. Famines and pestilences. We are being told repeatedly that there is a coming famine. We are being told repeatedly that there is pestilences coming, and we just won't be able to do anything about it. But God, if you have your faith in God and faith in what Jesus did, be secure in that. Don't worry about what they're telling you on the news. God is going to take care of it. This is all part of God's plan. In fearful events and great signs from heaven. I don't normally mention this, but I took the signs in heaven to mean something completely different than what we're seeing, and I'm trying just to put both things out there and not be like the Pharisee and say, this is not what I saw, or this is not what I thought it meant. But as far as the lunar eclipse and the solar eclipse and the planetary alignments, their timing and their potential meaning, there are too many coincidences occurring all at once, especially on April 8th, to be coincidence. There's got to be something more to what's going on. So I think that's where we are as far as that. Jesus goes on to tell them that they will be brought before kings and governors and into synagogues and questioned. But don't worry, because beforehand, I will, as you will bear testimony to me. This is 13 and 14. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand, for how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. And then when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you will know that the desolation is near. And that's that desolation of Daniel, where the Antichrist sets himself up as God in the temple at the midpoint mark of the tribulation. And we talked a little bit about the army surrounding Jerusalem, or the army surrounding Israel. And there are armies, huge armies surrounding Israel right now. We talked about it at the beginning. But within a couple hours' time, they could literally be surrounding Jerusalem. It would just be boop. Not that they're not surrounding Jerusalem right now, but I take this to mean much more closure. And then we talk about the parable of the fig tree, which is the budding of Israel becoming a nation again in 1948. And then where we stopped with this first part of the week is that Satan entered Judas, one of the 12, and Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how they would betray Jesus. And the guards and the temple rulers were delighted that they wouldn't have to arrest him in public. They could arrest him in private because Judas was going to do this. Then we come to the Day of Unleavened Bread, which is the Passover sacrifice. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. But this time, I think what we try to take away from this is the weight of this week and the weight of what Jesus took upon him and on his shoulders. And I keep getting the word works. When we went through Galatians, we talked a lot about works and how Jesus was the one who did the works for us, that we don't have the need to do these works. And what we're about to read next week, along with Isaiah 53, is a depiction of what works we would need to do to get ourselves saved. And not only did Jesus live a perfect, sinless life, following to a T all the 613 laws of the Jewish leadership, but he took on all the beatings and infirmities that our sins put there. The sins that came through when Adam and Eve sinned. In chapter 53 of Isaiah, and the last couple of verses in chapter 52, where the heading will start, the suffering servant, describe the beatings he took and describe what he was about to face. And not only was that written in Scripture, but he knew what he was about to face. And we'll read more about that, but that's the works that it took. You had to live a perfect, sinless life. You had to take those beatings, and you had to die so that you could be raised again on the third day, which is the gospel. And this week, next week, I want everybody to understand the weight of what was on the Son of God's shoulders and how he leaned into the Father and the Holy Spirit to bring him to the point where he could die for us. And then on that first day of the week, that Sunday morning, to rise again. So thanks. We'll get into more of the story next week. Cover what we can with the Last Supper. Try to mingle in all the interviews and beatings that he went through and get a picture of what happened. God bless. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, share if you will. And we'll see you soon. Have a great day as it starts to snow here.